So I'm going to begin by sharing my screen with just a few slides. Can I just, from my panelists, can I get a quick thumbs up if everyone can see my screen?
Looks good.
Wonderful, thank you. So welcome to our World Voice Day event 2021. The overarching theme of World Voice Day is One World, Many Voices. We're having the fortunate opportunity to host an event tonight here in the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, Division of Laryngology, as well as with our colleagues and friends in the Department of Music. Tonight, we're hosting a conversation with John Colapinto, who is the author of the wonderful book, This is the Voice. Beginning with just a brief introduction. As I mentioned, today is World Voice Day. And to those of you who don't know what World Voice Day is, we wanted to provide you with some context. World Voice Day, we celebrate every year, actually tomorrow, April 16th. But we wanted to get a run on it and celebrate a little bit early. So on this day, voice health professionals, performers, singers, everyone together worldwide join together to recognize World Voice Day. On World Voice Day, everyone, young and old, is encouraged to assess their vocal health and to take action to improve or maintain good voice habits. And again, everyone celebrates this, though, in a variety of different ways. While some World Voice Day events are about performance, other days are about vocal health awareness. Today, is a little bit about all of the above. So again, to give you just a little more information, I think the theme is really beautiful this year, One World, Many Voices. As a world, we've had a really tough year, and it's great to come together to celebrate our voices. So I did a quick look. Right now, as I think of yesterday, there had been about 175 different events registered across 42 different countries worldwide to celebrate, again, World Voice Day this year. So again, as I mentioned, our event today is to welcome Mr. John Colapinto. John is an award-winning staff writer at The New Yorker, and he is the author of the New York Times bestseller As Nature Made Him. He lives in New York, lives and works in New York City. Before we talk a little bit about, introduce the book in which we're going to be discussing tonight, I wanted to brief you, also introduce you all to our panelists today. We have 3 different panelists today from the Department of Otolaryngology here at Stanford, as well as from the Department of Music. My name is Elizabeth, or Beth Dorenzo. I'm an assistant professor and PhD speech language pathologist specializing in the assessment and treatment of voice disorders. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Kwong Sung, who is one of our laryngologists, as well as the director of our residency program. He's an associate professor, and we're both by courtesy appointed also in the Department of Music at Stanford. And we're also very thrilled to welcome Wendy Hillhouse, who we work with regularly. She is a lecturer in voice in the Department of Music, and she has been absolutely critical to working with us for caring for our students, singers, as well as their voices. But now what we're here to actually talk about today. This is the Voice. I had the pleasure of getting to read this book for the first time. I actually have read it more than once at this point in time, back in December when I was doing a review for Science. Briefly, This is the Voice. In this, Mr. Colapinto is a best-selling writer who explores what's our unique sonic signature reveals about our species, our culture, and each one of us. Finally, a vital topic that has never had its own book gets its due, and I could not agree more with that statement. So please, I know some people here have probably read, some people have not, so please see the link below. Check out the book, pick it up if you haven't, and I'm sure that too, after tonight, you'll be more than willing to get, again, to want to read the book if you have not already. I want to turn it briefly over to Kwong, who's going to, again, introduce John.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Happy World Voice Day. It's actually a day early. It's technically tomorrow, but somewhere in Asia, it's World Voice Day already. So we'll celebrate it today, a day early, when we do our usual grand round session for Stanford Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery. So welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you could join us. And of course, our special guest, John, for joining us all the way from New York. And if it weren't for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't be doing this today via Zoom. Well, we might not be able to might not have been able to coerce him to come out to California to do this in person with us, but at least we're lucky enough to have him via Zoom. So just briefly, I heard John on the Fresh Air podcast maybe a month or two ago, when he was interviewed there, and really found his the topics of his book interesting. Of course, being a voice specialist that I am, quite biased about that. But I also found that he was an excellent discussant and speaker. So I thought it'd be great to have him for our World Voice Day celebration. We're going to start by having him read an excerpt from from the introduction of his book. I'll kind of set it up a little bit because I asked him to read a different one than the one he read for Fresh Air, just because I wanted to do something different. I think that might point out something interesting for us today. But John had been asked to write a article about voice problems, and went to visit our colleague Stephen Zeitels out at Mass General Hospital, who's one of the world's most renowned voice specialists. And they started talking about John's voice, and John had been diagnosed with a vocal fold polyp. I'm spoiling the surprise, but Dr. Zeitels had scoped him and then was talking to John about his voice disorder and how it was impacting his life. So John, if you would go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So this is me reading from my book. That the voice is a vital clue to character and personality, to fundamental identity, was not news to me. We all make split-second judgments about people according to whether they speak in a deep, resonant, commanding baritone, or a high piping soprano, or a girlish whisper. We draw inferences about everything from where they were born and raised, according to how they pronounce their vowels and consonants, their accent, to their socioeconomic status, to their degree of education. And of course, people do this to us. When I moved to New York City from Toronto at age 30, I was regularly interrupted by strangers who would say with a knowing smile, "What part of Canada are you from?" They had detected the distinctive way that I pronounce the words out and about. Americans hear them as oot and a boot, which is a function of how I move my mouth when forming the sounds that Americans say as ow and I say as ooh. A gesture of the tongue and lips that I learned in earliest infancy from hearing my Canadian parents and my kindergarten friends pronounce that speech sound, and which was duly hardwired into the motor nerves that control my vocal organs when I talk. Because such aspects of voice are laid down during a critical period of brain development, unlearning them is extremely difficult, impossible for some. Today, after more than 30 years living in the United States, I have never lost my oot and a boot, and it never fails to make me feel a bit self-conscious about how my voice is telling strangers something intimate about me. So yes, I had always known that the voice is a kind of oral fingerprint, something unique to every individual, and from which listeners draw strong inferences, hence my worry over sounding like a Bukowski-esque barfly or a soprano-style heavy after my injury. But in speaking around that injury, I was apparently projecting a new personality into the world, a more monotone, less enthusiastic, less engaged personality. That's the excerpt.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, and truly too opening yourself up and vulnerability, because I think, as we know, as we'll talk about with the voice, is there's so much of ourselves that are wrapped up in our voice. So what we wanted to start by doing before launching into specific questions is give John the opportunity to explain to us and tell us why, of all topics, you decided to write an entire book about the voice. So we'd love to just, again, launch into that and hear a little bit more about your interest and your process in the book.
Yeah, great question, because any writer, maybe just any person, would tell you it's kind of a crazy task, extremely daunting. My feeling about the voice, when it was suggested to me that I write a book, it was actually the idea of the executive editor at Simon & Schuster, who had read my story about Dr. Zeitels and his operating on vocal injuries. And the editor said to me, is there like a larger thing, like a book in this? And my immediate thought was no, because if you really think about it, it's at once too narrow a subject, the voice. It's just so like, it's just this thing here in our throat. And yet at the same time, it's way too wide because it touches on, of course, accents, personality, psychology, race, sexual orientation, clues to which we can hear in voices. Emotion, of course, geographic upbringing, as I mentioned. So I was daunted by this idea of trying to get my hands around this massive subject. So my initial response to him was, there really is no book in this, I got to tell you. And I must also add that I had done a story a few years before for the New Yorker about linguistics, which is the world's most complicated and confusing and jargon-riddled subject, all about how we pronounce and create voice sound, how we translate thoughts into speech and language and air vibration. I mean, it's just crazy. But I knew I would have to touch on it at least if I wrote such a book. So, as I say, I said no. I went away from his office, but I could not stop thinking about this subject. I mean, each morning I would get up and I would find myself scribbling notes, thinking, well, if I were to tackle it, what would I do? And I started to make lists of all of those many, many subjects it would touch upon. And, as my book excerpt there suggests, I actually have a vocal polyp. I have an injury that I had sustained singing 20 years ago. And this did give me an extra sort of understanding of what our voices are doing in terms of projecting our personalities. So ultimately, I thought, how am I going to talk about all of that, about sort of an individual's place in the world, but also how the voice glues us all together as a society, as societies and civilizations? And the answer, in a nutshell, was really the sort of evolutionary backstory of the voice. The idea being that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And so what really started to fascinate me was how our voices exist on a continuum with the vocal noises that animals make. And that suddenly made me think, oh, there is a storyline in a sense. I mean, as a writer, you want to be a storyteller. I didn't want to be writing a textbook. I wanted to write a story that people could sort of find a little bit of a page turner, which is a lot to ask of yourself when you're writing about something as seemingly amorphous, invisible, ephemeral as the voice. But I think in sort of seizing on this idea of tracing the voice from its origins in this creature called the lungfish 400 million years ago, to the voices of our politicians today who shape entire societies by their, the leadership or lack of same of their voice, it really gave me the overarching storyline. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but sort of my way of describing it to people was to say, I'm writing a book that talks about how really our ability to control our vocal noises is what brought us to the top of the food chain. It's why we rule the world. We can turn these noises into speech and language. And that gave us the ultimate leg up. So there's a kind of an answer that goes in a lot of different directions, and the book kind of does as well. But I think that maybe gives you an idea of what I thought I was up against and why I was daunted.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And I should also say, before we respond to that, just really quickly, is that for all of those who are in attendance and listening, please feel free to ask questions throughout the seminar tonight using the Q&A function. We're going to put some time at the end to specifically try to answer some audience questions. But if there's something very specific that you'd like to ask related to what John is talking about at this moment, please feel free to use the Q&A function. We're going to be watching it the whole time. To go back, what this said is I think that we would love to have you start a little bit more and expand upon the beginning. I think that when I sat back and thought about the evolution as humans as the dominant species, even though I live and breathe the voice, had never really considered so much the role of the voice. Can you share with us a little bit more about those potential, beginnings from those lungfish? I love I love that story.
Yes, absolutely. This is actually a little bit of the research that convinced me I had to tackle a book, because when I found out that our vocal noises really begin 400 million years ago with these creatures that were the first to emerge from the sea. And it's a fish that lives in very shallow water environments that would sometimes find itself landlocked in periods of drought. So most of those fish that were trapped on land would die. But as Darwin told us with evolution, those creatures that happen to have had a random mutation, again, no grand design here, just a lucky mutation of a gene that enabled them to pull a little bit of oxygen from the air with their gills, as opposed to being underwater, which is where they ordinarily breathe. Those that had that little mutation were suddenly able to exist a little bit longer on land. They were able to maybe mate and pass that gene along. And what with sort of the way evolution rolls and the way, advantageous mutations lead to a new species, all of a sudden you had this fish that could live both on land and in the water. Really what happened was it developed a hole in the gills in its throat that opened up into its swim bladders that were ordinarily for flotation, but which developed into lungs. And so you had this creature that could now breathe on land, but could also breathe underwater with its gills. Problem was, when it went back into the water, it could now drown. Water could get through that hole in its gills into those lungs and kill it. So what happened was, what evolved over that little slit in its throat really was a valve-like thing that could open when it was on land so it could breathe air, and it would close so it could breathe water and live underwater. Now, if you have a valve that can close, but you've also got lungs that can push air through that closed valve, you get something that goes like this. And that's what was happening in the lungfish's throat. It was able to make grunting, as I say in the book, regrettably, fart-like noises, which
we heard
I regret
it, though. You could hear it, though. It was a good descriptor.
No, it's true, because it really is just a sphincter muscle hooked up to something that blows air. And, I regret to inform you that's all I'm doing right now. I am pushing air from my lungs through this valve in my throat that I've lightly closed in order to make speech sounds. Now, over time, as species evolved from those original lungfish, you had amphibians and reptiles and ultimately mammals emerge. And with each new phylum of animals, you had new advantageous mutations occur. And so for instance, with mammals, you had the introduction of the diaphragm, which really allows mammals to control their breathing and sort of, push air out hard to make a loud sound, move it out softly to make a soft sound. At the same time, this very simple sphincter valve that I mentioned developed all sorts of refinements and complications over the course of evolution. And all of a sudden you had animals like dogs, cats, mice that could pull those membranes of that valve tauter and tighter to create high-pitched sounds, or to slacken and loosen them to produce low-pitched sounds. So now you have an animal, you have a whole range of mammals that can use loud and soft, high and low for real communication. So what are they doing to communicate? Well, and why are they communicating? Well, as Darwin told us, staying alive is a matter of survival and reproduction. This is what evolution, of course, is all about. So you've got animals that are holding at bay predators and aggressors, in other words, surviving, by making noises that are threatening. And we know that those noises sound like low and loud. Think of a dog growling, think of a lion roaring. But then you've got mating sounds. I'm simplifying, but it really is, absolutely along this spectrum. You've got mating sounds and loving sounds and submissive sounds that are high pitched. We do it naturally when we talk to babies. And of course, our cats and dogs do it as well. Dogs will whine and mew when they're feeling a particular emotion. So it's not as if we as human beings have got, a totally new apparatus. Far from it. We have pretty much exactly the apparatus of dogs and cats and apes. But, and indeed, we signal emotionally hostility, submission, lovingness with those exact same range of sounds, low and high, loud and soft, blended in particular ways to create more nuanced emotions. But nevertheless, we're on that continuum. But what did we do ultimately that made us so incredibly special? What we did was gain this extraordinary control over the muscles in our face, our lips, and our tongue in order to shape those noises into the things that we call vowels and consonants. I mean, it's interesting if you think about a cat going meow. To an extent, it's already doing that. It's actually using the muscles to shape a sound. Dogs will howl, but we got really, really good at these highly timed, precisely sequenced noises that require us to hit parts of the inner part of our mouth with our tongue very precisely and at astonishing speed. I mean, what I'm doing right now is crazy because not only am I doing these consonants and vowels, but I'm also voicing and unvoicing certain consonants. So my b is voiced and my p, which is exactly the same gesture of the lips, is unvoiced, which means I pop open that little valve that the lungfish had when I'm saying the p sound, and then closing it quickly to say the vowel, because all vowels are voiced. It's how we sing. We sing on the vowels. I guess what I'm saying is these refinements to our vocal apparatus, and I mean, there's the whole question of the descent of our larynx, which I won't get into, except to say that it's what permits us to make different vowel sounds like A, E, I, O, and U, which are vital to all speech. All of these things, really, my book argues that these refinements to our anatomy actually created language. Someone like Noam Chomsky, the linguist, will tell you that language somehow blipped to life in our heads first as thought, and then we sort of somehow figured out a way to get it out through our mouths.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I really focus on a rival scientist who says, really, this was a feedback loop with advantageous physical anatomical adjustments, which fed back to make our brains better and smarter. Exactly. There you go. So that's, and it's really by being able to talk to each other that we could outsmart predators that were bigger and faster and more lethal than us. And we could get together and make plans to kill them and eat them instead of the reverse. And it's really what led to smartphones and Stanford University and places like that. No, smart people, in other words.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that provided exactly what we were looking for, is that understanding. Again, it's a completely different way than I think a lot of people have really thought about communicative language. Evolution and language, right? And I absolutely loved it and wanted to shout it from the rooftops.
Nice. Great.
I wanted to kind of jump off on that a little bit. You alluded to this article that you wrote about linguistics. My mother actually happens to be a PhD linguist who got her PhD from Stanford and has studied phonetics of Chinese language. So a lot of this struck very close to home. And I remember hearing a lot about this stuff as I was growing up. But that story that you tell about going to Brazil, to the Amazon, to do field research. I mean, that's what my mom did in China. My dad was an anthropologist that did field work on Aborigines in Taiwan. So all this struck a real chord to me. Can you talk a little bit about that trip to Brazil? It just sounds completely fascinating, and how that language of the natives, the Praha, kind of elucidated some of the findings the conclusions that you came up with.
Absolutely. Gosh, I'm forgetting which year it was now. It might have been almost 10 years ago or something. A missionary / linguist who works with this remarkable tribe deep in the Amazon published a paper in which he said this tribe really has one of the most unusual languages ever. It has a very small sound system, very small number of vowels and consonants. It communicates hugely through the music, the prosody, as it's called, of the speaking voice. And really, this linguist was saying this tribe in effect puts the lie to the notion that Noam Chomsky advanced, which is that all languages share this universal grammar, that all of them emerge from from a language organ in the brain. And this idea that every language has these same features. And the one feature that Chomsky said all languages have is something called recursion. It's a complicated sort of concept, but the basic idea is it's the ability to put ideas inside of other ideas to build long sentences. And actually, words themselves are recursive. If you take a D and a G and put an O in the middle, you get dog. But if you substitute the idea of an I in the middle, you get dig. Or, we're constantly putting things inside of things, sounds inside of sounds to make words and make sentences. So it is true that recursion is important to language, but it's not necessarily the case that every language's grammar works with this particular type of recursion that Chomsky talked about. So this tribe, according to this linguist, did not put ideas inside each other to say something like the dog that is at the lake bit the snake. Instead, they would have to say the dog is at the lake, the dog bit the snake. They have to break everything up into separate ideas. Now, this doesn't sound, like a big calamity to us, but for linguists, it was the end of the world because it meant Chomsky was wrong. So you want to go to the Amazon and meet this tribe and watch this linguist and write about, Chomskyan linguistics in effect being wrong. So I, of course, went there, and a Chomskyan linguist came as well to test this tribe. Now, all that I was hearing was the world's most unusual language. It really sounded almost like the chattering of birds, mixed with like a really up and down prosody and singing. It was spectacular sounding, but of course I couldn't tell if it was recursive or not. What did happen there that ended up being critical for my book, though, was this idea of, because I talk in the book about how we learn languages. Chomsky said that languages are in effect they're innate. They need just the briefest, most glancing kind of stimulation from the environment to develop it, to sort of burst forth as full language. Now, there's been a lot of studies to show that that's in fact wrong, that we're doing more teaching of language to children than we realize we are. When I was with this tribe one morning, I heard this incredible singing coming from the village. And I was with the linguist and the missionary, the Chomskyan linguist and the missionary, and they were talking about Chomskyan linguistics. And I heard this weird singing sound. And I went out and I watched this woman wrapping, wool on this thing and singing over and over these notes. And she must have done it for 20 minutes. And it was like 4 notes, very unusual scale, over and over. I didn't know what was going on. There was a little kid playing at her feet. I had no idea what was going on. Went back, mentioned it to both of these linguists. And the expert on the language said, oh, that's just, they sing their dreams. Like, he didn't know what was going on. But when I mentioned it to his estranged wife, who was also a linguist, she said, oh, no, that's the new thing that I'm learning. She's teaching the child the prosody of this language. This is the teaching of language, in action. It was really sort of putting the lie, in a sense, to this idea that, because if this tribe was going to be representative of how human beings behave with language, here was this woman, laboriously teaching, or playfully teaching, maybe, let's say, this child the unique music of their language. And, it was a beautiful moment for me when I was writing my book, because I realized, oh yes, I witnessed that. And it's totally in keeping with everything that I've been learning about the musicality of the voice, how we teach it to children, even if we don't know we're teaching it. So that was really a spectacular journey and a great thing to learn from that tribe.
Yeah, I think it's just an amazing coincidence that you did that article or did that research, and it found its way into this book on almost a completely different topic. But
Yes.
It also actually brings to mind a little bit what you're talking about, this teaching that this woman was doing. How important it is to have that constant repetition of teaching from an adult to a child, and also feedback back and forth, which we're completely losing right now in the era of at home learning, right? So kids are at home and they're interacting via Zoom, but they're not getting that close one-to-one interaction and repetition that you necessarily hear. And you also mentioned, I think, in your book about how we all thought that when broadcasters started using like standard types of pronunciation, that would catch on throughout the world, or throughout America or throughout Britain when they did that. But it never caught on, and languages or dialects are becoming almost more regionalized as we go along. But that kind of shows like how ineffective at-home learning might be.
I had not put, that's fast. I had not put that. I had not thought about the sort of implications of that for how kids are now learning on screens. But it's absolutely correct that the only way that children learn language as babies during that critical period when they're actually getting the sounds into their heads and learning how to make them is through actual interaction back and forth with a living being that they're talking to. So you learn the sort of the accent of your native tongue through mimicking your mother or father or the other caregivers around you. They also are actually prompting you and teaching you unconsciously. They don't know they're doing it, but they're sort of slowing their voice down, raising it in pitch a little bit, and so on. There's so much, in other words, going on in the live action interaction in time. So you're absolutely right. They discovered that the broadcasting of particular accents on television and radio has done nothing to regularize accents for a couple of reasons. Adults have already had their accents kind of fixed in them. There's a critical period. But small children are not being shaped by radios and TV because they're not speaking back to the radio and TV. Radio and TV are a one-way process in, but you've got to then give back out. You've got to start saying the things, molding the phonemes and so on, teaching your mouth the gymnastics. And so, yes, language is learned in this amazing live feedback loop. And it's interesting to think about how much is lost even after that critical period of language learning, when we are just learning through screens. I'm so glad my son is now 22 years old and is not, learning in elementary school right now on a screen. It would be horrifying. But this most delicate of things, this language that we do, this exquisite, precise dance with our tongue and lips, is something that, yes, we learn in a room with mom and dad that are making the air molecules vibrate, and that we are then learning how to mimic and also do. It's extraordinary.
We are in Silicon Valley here, of course, right? So I have to ask you a little bit about this idea of emotional computers. This really piqued my interest. I have so many friends who work for Google and Apple and Facebook. You let us know that certain software can recognize specific vocal emotions with, I think, 60 to 70% of the time, which is not that dissimilar to humans. So, and also potentially emotion-based machine learning software may be installed on our devices as early as 2022, suggesting that a computer is actually going to know the emotional makeup of your specific voice. So the voice is an incredibly powerful tool, which I think is very clear in your book. So I'd love to know what you potentially think are any personal or potential societal implications of such advances in emotional computing being so readily accessible to literally everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are apocalyptic visions that people have of computers becoming emotional and thus becoming, in effect, human. And actually, the movie 2001 was one of the first to explore that, how the onboard computer becomes a murderer when his emotions take over. He's paranoid and afraid that the astronauts are going to shut him down because he's made a mistake. So, I mean, there is that apocalyptic fear that we're actually going to create, our computers might turn on us, or they may just misunderstand an instruction from us and trigger nuclear codes and so on. Whether or not any of that happens, I don't know. But I think it will be a little frightening for me, certainly, when my computer, when I'm talking to it, if it can pick up that I am telling it a lie, or that I am, let's say, faking an emotion. Now, I give an example in my book of a moment during the financial collapse of 2008. I spent the day freaking out watching the news. My elementary school son arrived home from school. He couldn't see me, but I called out to him the way I did every day after school, and I didn't want him to know how panicked I was. So I tried to say in my most normal, cheerful voice, "Hi, Johnny, how was school?" And I did that, and his response was, "What's wrong?" What this means is, I mentioned the lungfish and all of that long evolution of language. What we were also doing there was evolving the ability to read each other's minds through these incredibly nuanced adjustments to pitch, pace, speed of speech, volume, and so on, that are communicating our emotions. And if you get a clash between, a cheerful "Hi, how you doing?" and some kind of hostility or fear, other things that we hear in the signal, then, you suddenly realize something's wrong. Now, good old Silicon Valley has been hard at work for years on teaching computers to hear the language component of our speech, the "Hi, Johnny, how was school" part, which is a series of speech sounds lined up in sequence, which is actually incredibly hard to make a computer to hear like distinctly, and then to make it, if it's going to speak, reproduce those sounds. But they learned how to do it through something called machine learning. Stop me if you've heard this one before. But what it really is you write an algorithm and you play which teaches the computer to teach itself. And then you play an immense amount of human speech at it, data, and it learns from hearing that speech. It hears how speech sounds are affected by being adjacent to other speech sounds. So they had that down, pretty darn well, quite quickly once they got the machine learning up and going. And we know that because we can ask Siri questions, and we can have the dictation part of our software work pretty darn well, make some mistakes, but fewer and fewer. What they're doing now is learning to get the emotional part of the speech in there. And as I've been doing when I do these interviews, if you bleed the emotion from speech, everyone signs off from the Zoom call because it's the most hideous thing in the world. You cannot follow someone. If I kept that up for 1 minute, you wouldn't even be able to listen to me anymore. So in other words, the music of speech, again, the prosody, is doing so much more work than we really give it credit for. And that's what the computer wizards in Silicon Valley have understood and are now imbuing computers with by writing algorithms that can hear, detect, and assign emotional values to that voice that goes up or the voice that goes down and everything in between. So the idea and the thought is, and I personally think it's going to happen, within a few years, we will be at the point, I really believe it, where we can say to our computer, something, I don't know what it might be, but the computer could tell us that they know we're lying or that we're faking something. They're going to start hearing those clashes between the surface layer of our speech and the emotion that's also coming through. So that's going to be a fun moment, people. Brace yourself.
Get ready. Get ready,
exactly.
Everybody. Here we go.
Yeah.
Things are about to get real.
Yeah.
I want to make sure, that Wendy gets the chance to ask some questions too, as particularly I think about, she has such a beautiful musical background, and of course that's such an important part of the book too.
Absolutely.
Well, so my question that I'm interested in hearing you, because I work with students who, well, if they're in voice lessons, they care about their voices. But I also teach a class to a bunch of students who are not necessarily singers about how the voice works. And I'm really fascinated by the lack of knowledge that your basic general population has about how the voice works. It's something that we just take for granted. And, everybody can sing, and we don't really, unless you're really interested in trying to do it professionally or something, we don't usually study. So I was fascinated by your introduction when you found yourself singing in a rock band. And you, after a couple of weeks, found that your voice wasn't functioning so well. And then it got worse and worse and worse. And I'm just really curious, did you know that a vocal injury could be as permanent and as thoroughgoing? And when you did find out, what was your reaction? Because what I find when we do occasionally get a student who has a vocal injury, and I send them off to Dr. Sung and Dr. J. Renzo, but they undergo an incredible, just amazing depression and anxiety when they lose this thing that they had taken completely for granted. So I'm just curious, what did you know? When did you know it? And how did it affect your decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because I had sung sort of from my teen years, and this injury happened when I was like 40. So I had always been singing just casually, and I had been hoarse in the past, and it had always gone away. So I had this belief that, like when I really blew up my voice, I thought it was not going to be permanent. Because I'm not a professional singer, in other words, I was not making my livelihood by doing this. I guess I was sort of a good enough rock singer that I had done it in front of like fairly large crowds of people here and there in an amateur capacity. But it was not cutting away the thing that was my real identity or my art form, my livelihood. I did interview Julie Andrews, who had an injury of that nature, and she really talked about kind of the existential horror of it when that's taken away. For me, it was these subtler realizations of what it was doing in fact to my speaking voice. I did not know until, well, I guess I did go for a checkup with my voice shortly after I began to realize it was messed up. I have a vocal coach in my building who heard me speak and said, "You've got a bad vocal injury." It was only when she suggested it might be a tumor, that I said, "Oh, I'm going to go to the doctor," because I'm a writer. My voice exists on the page, so my voice is raspy, whatever. So I went off and had it looked at, and it was this polyp. And it was really then, I think, that I first learned that the vocal cords do not produce sound like a bowed string, that they are in fact that valve that we mentioned earlier that is rapidly opening and shutting and chopping the airstream into pulses that create the of phonation. So when I learned that my vocal cords were slamming together at this speed, I began to realize, oh, that's how it got hurt. 10 years later, when I did this story on Dr. Zeitel's, and he really described that process in greater detail, that you get a bleed in one of your vocal cords, it leads to scar tissue and so on. He was the one that said to me, "Okay, forget your singing voice. You may wish you were a rocker. You're not. You're a writer. You're a sedentary writer. Your problem is your speaking voice. It is more messed up than you realize. You are grossly hoarse." Now, I'm not sounding as bad now as I did when I did that story because I've been further training myself. He said we unconsciously train ourselves to get rid of some of the rasp. And he said, really, I'm dropping my voice into a register that's a little lower than natural. And he said, you're kind of keeping the prosody in a narrower range, so you're being more monotone. I mean, all of this was super depressing. I thought, wow, I didn't want my expressiveness. I didn't want to be a monotone, boring guy. And I realized, again, I suddenly thought, oh yeah, I used to do like poetry reading competitions in high school, with 2 of which I actually won, for God's sake. I had entered a raconteur contest in college. So all of a sudden, that was another reason I ended up doing the book. I looked back over my history of my voice. I was like, wait, I've been obsessed with my voice since I was like a teenager, like the power of it for poetry reading, raconteurism, singing. And so, yes, to answer your question, Wendy, I was suddenly quite depressed when I thought, wow, that's, who I am, who I was, is permanently gone. My son, who I mentioned, is 22. Not long ago, he heard a press interview I did before I damaged my voice. It was years ago for another book I wrote. And he was dumbstruck. He was like, Dad, that can't be you. Is that you, Dad? Because he had never heard anything but this raspy Tom Waits voice that I've got. So yes, it was huge, actually.
Yeah, the voice is so tied up in our personality, right? You in that excerpt, you say it's the fingerprint of you, and when it changes, when we have patients that develop an injury, or I do a surgery that happens to, because I'm treating something else that damages the voice, or you have somebody that has an injured voice, it really can affect the personality quite a bit. And
Wow.
We talk about that too in relation to the aging voice as well in the book. And I'll read a little quote that you wrote. You say the psychosocial factors associated with the aging voice, the withdrawal from social life, the self-recusal from formerly enjoyable activities like singing in church or joining family and friends at too noisy restaurants, how these interactions increase loneliness and give rise to depression and poor overall health. That encompasses not just vocal injury, but the gradual decline of the voice that people have when they get into their 70s and 80s.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you read that part, because it does suggest how this thing we do that we take so much for granted, i.e. speech, when something starts to affect it, it ramifies through our whole life in these really remarkable ways. And yes, in older people, it can be quite sad to realize, oh, gee, Aunt Susie is kind of not joining in because she can't be heard over all of us young people that are barking away and trying to seize the floor. And she may have something to say, but she can't, it's going to be too much effort even to get the words out loud enough for us to hear, and so on. So yes, this everything. I mean, I know I've just written a book about the voice, but I really came to see it as being kind of everything. It's pretty remarkable.
We got
I was about to say, it's about 6:48, and I know that we have a little bit of time left, but we're starting to have some more questions rolling in. So I want to make sure that we have some time to answer some audience questions that we may have. And so we got a question. I think this is a great comment. Can you talk a little bit about the power of the voice for business professionals? How it can truly impact careers?
Well, this is, it's fascinating. I looked at a lot of books about how to improve your prospects for getting promotions and so on, and rising to the top of your company and so on and so forth. I mean, what surprised me and struck me as kind of a little boring was that the advice is always the same, seemingly, which is, dropping the voice into a more commanding lower register. Why? Well, it goes back to that evolution of emotional sounds in animals, so that we lower our voice literally, and mice do it. Doesn't matter how small the creature is. A mouse does it in order to create the illusion of a bigger, more kind of a capable, if you're facing down a predator, you want to seem bigger. So you lower your voice. It suggests a bigger resonance chamber of the body. It suggests longer, thicker vocal cords. So it's this illusion. It's this size bluff. So the idea is, in so many of these books about how to be more effective at work, is to lower the voice into this register that makes you seem more commanding. I simply don't buy it. I mean, I think.
Thank you. Thank
you.
Yes,
for that. The voice.
Thank you for that.
I mean, all of our human interactions are way, way too nuanced and complex. And, depending on what sort of business you're in, what sort of organization you're in. Someone that speaks with a, in a higher voice, in a more sensitive sounding voice, in a less aggressive voice, in a less mansplaining, yelling voice, whatever it is, may do far, far better. So I guess in answer to that question, I would use the cliche sort of read the room. And by that, I mean, read the emotional tenor of everything that's going on around you, and, the people that you're competing with, I suppose, and the people that you're hoping to impress. But also don't be fake. I mean, maybe that's the truest and fullest message of my book at the end of the day, because our voices, we are so good at masquerading with our voices. Actors, of course, do it all the time. Some people are better than others, but we are sort of being polite sometimes and casual other times, and formal, and we've got all these things we do. But if we want to be respected, liked, trusted, all of these things that go toward, I suspect, promotion, I think we want to try to speak in a way that's real. And this, again, goes so deep. I mean, you want to put someone on a psychiatrist couch and start saying, get in touch with who you really are. Let's find out who you are, so that can start to come out through your voice, not through manipulating your voice, but through letting yourself emerge in a way, feeling enough confidence in yourself. This is a very vague answer because it's unanswerable, except to say, you have to find your voice. You have to be confident in it, and you should be confident. Throw it out there, and be bold, and be confident. I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say mention one other thing that you wrote about, which is this study by Nalina Ambati on surgeons, predicting which surgeons were going to get sued for malpractice suits. Since we're a residency program, I'm the program director and teaching our residents. Tell our residents what kind of voice will not get you sued.
Well, the one that won't get you sued is the one that doesn't sound domineering and dominant and too deep and too loud and unempathetic. You want to sound empathetic. And thank you for reminding me of that. That's the best way, to sort of sum up that long answer I just gave about finding a voice that isn't overly domineering. I don't think anyone wants to hear that in a man or a woman. It's just, it's off-putting. And absolutely, that study was hilarious. I mean, the doctors that spoke in this particular way were the ones that got sued, even if their record of, mistakes and so on was much less bad than the empathetic sounding guys. They simply didn't get sued.
Right. It's a dominant tone that's deep, loud, moderately fast, unaccented, and clearly articulated. It was a giveaway for who got sued.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. The clearly articulated is interesting too. You can actually sound too sort of concerned with sounding crisp and clear. You can sound sort of over precise. Boy, the voice is subtle. Yeah.
True.
The messages we send.
Another one of our audience members asked if you had any update regarding where Dr. Zeitels is on that special compound that he was developing. And if you can't answer this, I can too.
Oh, wow.
I know this.
You should answer it, Beth, because I actually didn't check in with him. And probably should have, but I was on deadline, and I checked to see if he had published on it. But do you know where he stands?
I mean, so there's actually a number. This is a big part of what I do too, as part of my day-to-day. And there's a lot of groups going about this in different ways. We're still not yet doing much in humans yet, but there are a lot of things still happening in the labs, whether it be with cells or potentially with animal models working to test these types of products. So we're not there yet in humans, but a lot of people are really working on it really hard, including Dr. Zeitels and his group, as well as many others are doing great work in this area.
Well, I love the fact that it's not figured out yet, because it really speaks to how special our vocal cords are and the unusual.
Right.
Right.
And I think nothing has truly undergo such mechanical stresses like the vocal folds, which makes material development incredibly challenging, because it has to, whatever material has to also be able to be constantly in motion, right? When we're speaking. So it's a great thing, to think about.
Wow.
I think that we have to ask again, as many of us here are healthcare providers and voice professionals, that we can't leave you without asking you. You did not have surgery to get your polyp removed. You presumably still have that polyp hanging out and vibrating away.
Yes.
Tell us, and again, like I said, as many of us as professionals are like, let us get in there, let us fix it. But I think that it brings up a really important point, that everyone's voice has their own journey. So can you tell us why?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually thought when I pitched the book, I thought, I'll tell them in my book proposal that, I've got this vocal injury, but I'll have it fixed as I'm writing the book. And then we'll have this wonderful, moving, tear-jerking scene at the end when I reemerge Lazarus-like with a beautiful, smooth voice. But over the course, well, first of all, my editor said, you don't have to have that opera. I mean, it'll still be a great book. I was like, okay, that lets me off the hook. I don't necessarily have to go under the knife. No, but it was really in the writing of it that I began to think, what, this is my voice now. The book asserts that, of course, these vocal noises we make are much more important to our lives and our identity, our futures, our destiny, who we marry, what jobs we get, whether we get promoted. Our individual destiny is much more wrapped up in our voice than we give it credit necessarily for being, which would beg that I actually have the polyp removed if I truly believed what I was saying there. Well, the fact of the matter is I do believe it. And I also believe that the voices that we develop and that we end up with are, in a weird way, they're kind of a roadmap to how we have lived, who we have been. That my voice has kind of a patina in it. It has something that suggests age. It has something in it that may suggest a certain recklessness, because I was totally reckless with my voice. I was not a good boy doing vocal warm-ups before singing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm enough of an idiot that I've started singing again with another rock band, really rattling that polyp and making it worse, probably injuring the healthy vocal cord. But I sound like me because I've lived the life that I've lived. I am a writer. My main concern really is with the voice that I create on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And probably lurking somewhere in the back of my mind was John Updike's comment years ago that a writer should actually be careful of not talking too much, because they'll talk their books away. You'll actually have an idea for a book and you'll drink with your friends and you'll tell it, and there goes the pressure behind it. So I've had a sort of suspicion of my loquaciousness. I'm a little bit of an extrovert. Something like this that holds back my extroversion, my tendency to talk on and on, is not a bad thing. It's a kind of break, and it might promote me to stay at my desk and do my writing. So these are all of the reasons I think that went towards me thinking, okay, I'm 62 years old. It's okay if I have a raspy voice. Some people even said they think it's kind of okay. So these are all the reasons that I thought, you know what? I'm just going to stick with it.
What did I think was say? The voice, it's your voice, the voice that you deserve, right?
Well, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
When I mentioned my son, it's kind of funny. This is the voice he knows. He's known this for 22 years. If I was suddenly sounding like a different guy, maybe that freaked me out maybe a little bit as well. I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah. But you all have such lovely voices. My God. So is everyone a singer that I'm looking at, or no? Like even an amateur?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Have done some singing.
Cool.
Some more than others.
Yeah. Some more active than others.
Yes.
Well, one of the things I touch on in the book is the weird way, and I guess I would ask if you agree that singing does something different than anything else we do with our voice, doesn't it? It's got this kind of releasing of the soul. It's got some cleansing, cathartic power. Don't you feel like it does something to you different than anything else?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And you
Yeah.
know, when you get a chance to sing with a choir, like you said, I mean, it's or with an orchestra, it's just an unbelievable feeling.
Yeah.
You know, being part of something bigger.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's tremendously uplifting.
That's yes. I know we probably press for time, but I'll just say that's kind of the mystical aspect of the voice that I wanted to give. My book is so scientific and sort of Darwinian and kind of unweaving of the rainbow of this beautiful voice that we have. But at the end of the day, there is this weird thing we do called singing, which I'm not sure anyone can finally explain why it moves us to tears, why it's so wonderful to do. And that is something that I no longer can do terribly effectively. But anyway, I admire all of you for being singers.
Well, you're more than welcome to come out here and see us, and you know, we can help you take care of that polyp if you want me to or not.
Ah, nice.
You might not even have to go to the operating room to do it. So, and
wow.
We could talk about that if you're in the Bay Area.
Nice, thank you. Okay, I may be getting myself out there.
Yeah.
Well, if nothing else, we should come together over a nice dinner and a glass of wine.
Oh, that would be so fun.
If you're out here.
That we enjoy.
It is 7 o'clock, so I think we should probably wrap this up. It's gone much too fast because we have a ton of more questions that we could have asked you and more to discuss tonight. But I think we'll leave it at this. I will say to our audience that I did paste a link to buy John's book in the chat. You can click on that, but of course you can always find it in your local small bookstore or online at any of the larger bookstores online as well.
Wonderful. I just have to ask before we go, Beth, you alluded a second ago. Did you write the review in Science?
I did.
And I somehow didn't put that together. Fab, thank you.
You're welcome.
It was my proudest review, for God's sake. I thought, like, hey, if Science thinks this book is good, my God.
I did write it.
Oh,
and
I love
then,
it.
like I said, it all came together as I wrote the review, and then we all heard you on Fresh Air, and Kwong said, what if we try to get a hold of him? And here you are today. So when I say I was thrilled, like I said, when I've read the book more than once, I've literally read the book more than once now. And
wonderful.
I absolutely loved it and recommend it to all of my voice friends. So thank you, everyone, particularly Mr. John Colapinto, so much for taking the time, especially East Coast time, to join us. Please, if you have not already, purchase and his book and enjoy. And if anyone is here because they're worried about their voice, because they can always reach out here to Wendy or Kwong or myself as your local Bay Area. Some of many local Bay Area voice experts. We're here to help. So again, thank you, everyone. And thank you for the Department of Otolaryngology, as well as the Department of Music, for helping us to support this event this evening.
Thank you so much, everyone.